Wokeness is a mindless way of thinking that allows people to judge everyone around them from their high horse, even though we all can see from our lower perspectives that their horse is made up of shit. And this way of thinking tends to be more associated with the left, but I think that in this current day and age, it's becoming more and more undeniable, the woke right. And I know a lot of people take issue with the term woke right, but I don't really know what other way to describe it. And there has been so much debate on who is the woke right and what actually constitutes this mentality when it's mirrored on the right side of the aisle. And so I want to talk about that today because I think that it's probably going to be a little bit more nuanced than a lot of people are making it out to seem. And I also think that it's a really important conversation because if you can't recognize these issues within your own side, then what's the point? You know, the point of, for me personally, making these videos is not to appease one side or to appease one audience. It's just to look at the facts and try to get to the bottom of whatever the issue is at hand. And if we can't do that, then there's just sincerely no point. So that is what we're going to be looking at today and discussing today. But before we get into any of it, this is your reminder to subscribe to this channel. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. If you want to follow me on any other social medias, those are found down below. I make short form videos on those if that is something that interests you. And with all of that being said, my name is Noelle. This is Just Say No. Let's dive in. Okay, so as I sort of alluded to, the right itself is very divided on what actually constitutes the woke right. You have, from the way I see it, the Tucker Carlson camp. This would include people like Candace Owens, Dave Smith, this group of people. And then you have the James Lindsay camp, and this would also include like Constantine Kissin and that kind of group of people. And to be honest, as I was going through my research and kind of looking at the arguments of both sides, I feel like there's definitely elements of wokeness on both sides. However, I do think that it is a little bit more prevalent on one than the other, but that is what we are here to discuss today. And once again, I did make a video quite a while ago, sort of lightly diving into this topic. I've been working on this video for quite some time, and quite a few of you had a disagreement with me on the fact that the woke right exists at all. And I think that inherently it is a mistake to not recognize this. And if you take issue with the term woke, fine, but we do have to find a way to almost describe and define these elements of the right, because they are, you know, kind of going against everything that we've been preaching against, are they not? And so I want to personally kind of build a case for wokeness on the right, because I think that that is exactly what it is. I think when you look at the definition and look at these examples, that is what you will find. Now, of course, it's not going to be as whole or as pure as you find it on the left, because the left almost invented the idea. They embody it so well. It was so cute, so sweet over there. So I don't think you'll find quite as pure of a version on the right. I think it's worthy of being called out, and I think it's worthy of calling it woke. And who knows, maybe that is enough to help them to correct course, although I don't think that has been the outcome, but regardless. So Google defines it as wokeism, often used disparagingly, refers to progressive or left-wing attitudes and practices that emphasize social justice and are perceived as doctrine, self-righteous, or insincere. ChatGPT defines it as woke, means being aware and attentive to social injustices, especially those related to race and inequality. Grok says that it is a heightened awareness of perceived social injustices, often associated with progressive or left-leaning ideologies. So essentially, the core of all of these definitions circle around noticing and talking about social injustice and not staying silent about that. And I do believe that initially that was what wokeism was. However, I think you would be wrong to ignore what it has morphed into. Now, if you are looking at that original definition of just focusing on social injustices, which often includes kind of having a boogeyman, the white man, colonialism, systemic racism, any of these sorts of things that people on the left point to as to a reason as to why they can't succeed in society. You do definitely see elements of that on the right, as we will get into. However, again, I think to ignore all of the things that it's morphed into is a mistake. So for example, from my observations, wokeism has a few key characteristics: using posturing to shut down speech. You're a bigot if you think the country should have borders. You're a racist if you think affirmative action is discriminatory. You're a transphobe if you acknowledge that there is a reality of biological sex. They use these sorts of tactics to shut down people from speaking. And that kind of goes hand in hand with cancel culture. That's why whenever you see something, there was just recent events with Sydney Sweeney, Billie Eilish. We're actually going to talk about that in a later episode later this week. But that's the woke cancel mob. Now, going off of that, there's just a general sensitivity to language. For example, Disney replaced ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls in park announcements and greetings with good evening, dreamers of all ages. Obviously, more atrocious than this is terms like birthing person or chest feeder, all of these kind of borderline derogatory terms that are used in order to make men who believe themselves to be women feel included in womanhood, which, you know, and my saying that is offensive. Or you even see it with the forced use of pronouns, even though the person that is asking to be called she, her is a 6'4" man with a beard. So all of these sorts of things kind of go hand in hand, and they are absolutely elements of wokeism. Furthermore, there is the protecting of the perpetual victim from the perpetual victimizer, and that permanent victim status. And this is what we were just touching on with things such as systemic racism or colonialism or misogyny or any of these sorts of things that people will point to as to the reason why they cannot succeed. Or not even just like the reason that they can't succeed, but maybe even just the reason that they're in the position that they're in. Like homeless people are in these situations because of people in power, such as landlords, and not due to any of their own choices. It takes away your own self-determination, almost your own accountability, and puts it on somebody else. And from my perspective, the final core element of wokeism is the heavy reliance on identity politics, right? We saw this with Joe Biden saying, if you don't know if you're for me or for Trump, then you ain't black.
I will. It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
Insinuating that all black people have to think and vote the same way. And if you're somebody like Candace Owens, for example, you are a self-hating black person. Because how dare you think outside of your designated group based off of immutable characteristics? So now that we have sort of established, based off of multiple definitions, my own self-analysis, what I think we really truly embody to be wokeism, can this be applied to the right? Right? That is the core of this question. That is the core of this issue. And if it can be, are either of these camps correct? So in putting together this episode, I felt like the best way to go about it was to kind of steelman each side, kind of look at what each side is defining as the woke right. So we are going to go ahead and start with Tucker Carlson. And broadly speaking, this camp of people, again, we're looking at people such as Candace Owens, Dave Smith, this group of people. Obviously, they don't all think exactly the same, but I think they largely agree on the core tenets of this, believe that the woke right is a movement of people who want to censor speech, particularly as it seems when it comes to Israel. And I think that we're going to find that Israel is a really large part of all of this. There was an uproar over Joe Rogan many months ago now when he had on Dave Smith and Douglas Murray. And suddenly you had people on the right mad at Joe Rogan and calling for his censorship because of the way that that episode played out. And we're going to talk more about that later on. But if that is not a tenet of wokeism, truly I don't know what is. Now, James Lindsay's camp, again, broadly speaking, identifies the woke right to be a group of people who view themselves to be perpetual victims, particularly of the state of Israel. They're kind of inverting that left-wing tactic of victimized groups, where the left sees people of color being victimized everywhere. The woke right seems to see white people being victimized everywhere. Essentially, there is a they out there to get them. Truly, though, it does seem like foreign policy specifically relating to Israel is really at the core of this. A lot of the conversations that I have seen and watched tend to circle back to Israel. And so I guess let's take it on from that angle. And in order to do that, I suppose my question would be for both sides, where is the line? Because there has to be lines somewhere. So for the James Lindsay camp, where is the line for your pro-Israeli stances to where they no longer are pro-America? I know that this is the core issue for the other side of this conversation, and I completely understand and agree. I do tend to sympathize more with that side as somebody who is very firm in America First policies. I think that it does get to a point where the support of Israel is no longer America First. So where is the line? People who are highly critical of Israel, for the most part, just want to feel like America is the top priority of Americans and our president and our senators and these people who are in power and making decisions, and they do not feel that way. And that's not to say that there's not sincere anti-Semites actually involved in that conversation. Of course, they're going to flock to that side. It only makes sense. Just like there are people who are actually racist saying all lives matter. But that does not negate the fact that the vast majority of people who are having this conversation have a sincere, genuine point, and you cannot just write them off by calling them anti-Semitic, and that is what tends to happen from the James Lindsay camp, and that is a woke tactic. Now, flipping it in the inverse for the Tucker Carlson camp, at what point are your criticisms of Israel anti-Semitic? Like, at what point does it switch from, I think Israel is wrong for doing X, Y, and Z to I think it is the Jews? I think that Nick Fuentes is the prime example of this. He's very open about his beliefs on this. But what I find to be interesting is even just kind of going through my research here with you guys and working through it as I'm filming this, it does seem, like the vast majority of people who are critical of Israel are also very quick to say, obviously, I'm not talking about all Jews, though. So I don't know. That one just seems kind of open and shut to me personally. But those are the outstanding questions. So I do want to look at a couple of examples of both sides behaving in a woke manner, right? Because if we're going to get at the core of what constitutes the woke right, then we got to build the case. So the biggest and most recent example for the Lindsay camp was the debate that I mentioned on Joe Rogan with Dave Smith and Douglas Murray. For the sake of this video and the topic at hand, I'm not so much concerned with the portions of the debate where they were actually debating. I am far more concerned with the entire premise that Douglas Murray was presenting of you're not an expert, so who are you to speak on this? Because he spent the first 45 minutes of this debate saying that Dave Smith should not be speaking on this as vehemently as he is because he is not an expert. And Joe Rogan brought it up, and it was a large conversation thereafter. It was very reminiscent of you can't have an opinion on COVID because you're not an expert. You need to trust the science TM, Lord Fauci, bow down. And I think that struck a nerve for a lot of people. And it was at this point that I think the conversation of woke right really kicked into high gear because you saw so many people defending Douglas Murray and saying, no, he's right. For example, there is a commentator named Konstantin Kisin. I actually used to be quite a big fan. He has his show with his friend, Trigonometry, and I used to think that was a really good show. I just kind of stopped watching it, but he shortly after this made a video, and basically the premise was that he says that he was wrong about new media, which is essentially the podcast world. And he says that he used to think that it was a good thing that we broke away from mainstream media and their guardrails because they were always intentionally lying to us, which is, of course, true. That is the entire reason that podcasts became popular, is because people were watching MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, all of these mainstream media news sources and started realizing, hey, actually, I don't know that that's true. We now have information in the palm of our hand and we can kind of fact check these things, and the younger generations are doing exactly that. And also the podcast format allows for longer conversations. That was the whole conversation around Trump going on Joe Rogan and Kamala Harris going on Joe Rogan. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. the new media is a good thing, but Konstantin Kisin makes the argument in this video that he now finds it to be dangerous because there are now blurred lines between serious commentators and entertainers. And his point largely is that the rise of people like Rogan is inherently causing the decline of experts. And I think there's two elements of this, and the first is like, no shit, right? Because it was the experts that said it was 2 weeks to slow the spread. It was the experts who said Trump was a Russian spy. It was the experts who said that there were weapons of mass destruction. I think that we've learned that the experts lie a lot, but also not all of them. And I think that what we have seen is that the experts who are honest still have a good reputation, because that's kind of the way that it works. You know, when you are honest, people tend to continue to trust you. And that's kind of where the marketplace of ideas wins out. And that's why podcasts are winning out. It is a marketplace, and the people are speaking with their views. And of course, that doesn't mean that, and no one is saying that experts don't exist and aren't knowledgeable, which seems to be the crux of what they are saying. It's just meant to say that if they're so knowledgeable, they should be able to come into a debate and debate the ideas and not say you shouldn't speak because you're not an expert. And this whole premise feels inherently woke to me. It feels woke to say that you can't speak on this because you don't know as much as I know. It feels woke to say, actually, maybe we should trust the mainstream media. You guys are kind of crazy. And actually, the marketplace of free ideas is kind of dangerous. That feels woke to me. And I cannot support that idea. That goes against everything that I believe in, because you put that into practice. You put the idea of only experts are allowed to speak on certain topics. That results in censorship. And of course, they're not flat out saying that only experts are allowed to speak. But that is the insinuation, right? It is the insinuation. When Douglas Murray comes in and does not debate actual arguments, but just sits there and asks him, have you been there? But that kind of perfectly ties us into the other side of this, because with this idea of censorship, there also can lie a sense of victimization. How the woke left seems to bow to systemic racism and the phantom discrimination, there are elements of the woke right who see the boogeyman of state censorship behind every corner. And I have fully fallen into this, and I still have my moments, especially with apps like TikTok. I do think TikTok is a little bit of an exception because they are just hyper censorial. But just to give you an example, they rolled out a new policy where you would post a video and it would just automatically go under review. Every video for everybody. I didn't know that, and so I automatically assumed that I was being targeted. Because that's just kind of the way that I have been programmed to think because of how much I have been censored on that app. I've lost 2 accounts. The censorship on that app is insane. But then I kind of had to have a reality check. You know, Noelle, not everyone is out to get you. And this was just, a thing that's happening. Now, that said, I don't know that this per se is as large of an issue as what's going on the flip side, because frankly, it's just making people's lives more miserable. However, there could be the argument, given the fact that a lot of this self-victimization is pointed at Israel, that it breeds anti-Semitism, and there absolutely is room for that conversation. And it comes back to the question of where's the line? When is enough enough? But again, I just don't know that it's on the same level of borderline advocating for censorship. From how I am seeing it is there's one side of the right, woke right, that is embracing the censorship and speech revisions that are arguably the most harmful aspects of present day woke leftism. And that is a huge problem. The amount of people on the right who have been attacking Rogan for not defending Israel and for having conversations that don't push the correct narrative. I'm just saying, you should be allowed to ask questions. You should be allowed to ask if Israel is committing a genocide. That should be something that we are allowed to discuss. You can disagree and present your arguments as to why they aren't, but you should be allowed to ask it, and you should be allowed to say that you think it's wrong that innocent Palestinians are dying. That shouldn't be a controversial statement, and yet it is. And the fact that it is giving woke, because it's giving the same energy as the left getting mad at Rogan when he didn't post a black square. Yikes. It's giving the same. So I think through my research, because when I started this, I really didn't have a side that I felt was correct, because I didn't feel like I knew enough, but I do feel like there are woke elements on both sides. I think one side is embracing more dangerous aspects of that. But at the end of the day, frankly, I think that everyone is going to have an element of this, because at the end of the day, humans are inherently sensitive. Every single person is going to have at least one thing where they don't really think rationally about it, and they just have an emotional response to it. And that's just human nature. And that's kind of where this all springs from, is emotion. And we are emotional beings, and it's going to continue to happen. The only sensible counter to it is to have as much sense as possible and to continue to allow speech. And that's why I think that the Douglas Murray, James Lindsay approach is more dangerous, is because they're censoring speech. They are arguing for less speech, and that's never a good thing. Just because you don't like the arguments that are winning out in the marketplace of free speech does not mean you get to censor that argument. It means you need to present better counterfactuals. So I guess that's where we end that. I am really curious what you guys think. Let me know down below. Do you think that woke right exists at all? If you do you think it's Camp A or Camp B? Is there another term that you would call it? Let me know. Be respectful, be kind. I don't want you to be mean to me. Please don't be mean to me. Honestly, if you've made it this far, I know this was a very long video, so I don't know why you're not subscribed. It actually makes no sense, and that should be your logical next thing to do, is subscribe to the channel. So with that, I appreciate you, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye.